Well, hello again. Let's take a closer look at some of the things that can happen when you start working with OBJ files. And maybe we are not quite ready yet. We're almost there, right? I mean, you can see here, this is a great looking Mac from Chris Locke, and he created it in Hexagon, um, a program that I like to describe as the successor to Amapi because it was created by some of the programmers that were also working on Amapi at one point at Eovia. Now with DAS, I don't know if it's further being developed, but there are a few artists that use it that are in my circle of entourage, as we say in France. And but what I'm seeing here is this model came in black, right? So the one I just loaded here is showing in black. If I switch to the fast bounding box, I can see it here, and there's no shading. Right. And whereas here on this one, it's fixed. And so I want to describe how I fixed that in case you encounter a similar problem. There's actually two problems on this one, and we'll try to fix them both. One is there's no shading information, no coloring. And by default, our parser doesn't produce any sort of default lighting or shading color values for the surfaces. So it's all black, which sometimes is great because you may just want that as a mask, like a transparency mask. So you of course you could do that differently too. You can set everything, all the lights to black, and then there is no lighting. So ideally, we should have, perhaps in the future, there will be a version that will have a default color and makes it, medium gray or light gray or something like that at the least. But right now, let's see how this actually came about. So if you look at the file that I got, this one here. This was the original file, and it looks great, but well, it doesn't look so great in Howler. And the reason is that the only thing I have here is the material, the geometry file, the OBJ. OBJ is the object, right? So that's the geometry file, and it doesn't produce. It doesn't. It normally should have also the material file going with it. But so how do you work with that? Well, first of all, you can open this in your favorite text editor like Notepad. I would say go with Notepad++ or TextPad or something like that. Those are really fast and much more powerful to edit or view the content of a text file. And so what you see here, I can even use my thumb wheel with the control key to zoom in. So there's a couple of lines we can ignore which are commented out. Those are header lines, if you will, but you can have comments later on again. And then there's usually a list of vertices. So there's a vertex number 1, XYZ values, vertex number 2, XYZ values. So starting from here, we're building a table of all sorts of vertices, and these will be used in creating the facets. Maybe there's a triangle that goes through this vertex and this one, right? Something like that. So the OBJ export builds a long list of vertices, and at some point it switches to nominating or designating which vertices belong together in an actual, in a facet, right? So the primitive we're looking for here is not V for vertex. That's when we're done with the list of all the vertices. We usually switch to the geometric buildup. There is a group identifier here, which I would, by the way, recommend putting no spaces in the name here. That can be a problem, so figure 1 or -1 or _1, much better. Same with material files if you have, and that's really what's missing here. We don't have materials. There is one vertex normal, a vertex, not a normal, a vertex address, right? Vertex texture. VT is vertex texture. And it's not very useful if, every vertex is pointing at exactly the same. I don't know why the hexagon export does that. It's not something that I would recommend, so I will take it out. But of course, then what do we do? Is that value actually being used? And you can see it. Yeah, it is being used. Every polygon, every facet that you have here comes with an index to the vertex and an index to the one and only vertex texture in this case. Now, I don't know if that's actually going to be the culprit for why it's appearing black. I just wouldn't waste the space in here in this file or the time in processing it to have a vertex UV address index identified if it's not going to be varying from one place to another. If it's always the same coordinate value, it's not going to be able to map anything to it, right? So, and in fact, maybe what it is mapping there is the color black. So, and especially given that we didn't actually give it a texture. So the only thing we have here is a bunch of facets. Another thing to note is that most of these are quads. You see this one here has one vertex, another vertex, a third one, and a fourth one. So these are quadrilaterals, quads. And that's fine. We can now actually process those. In the early days, even just a month ago, that was a no-no. But now we are able to process triangles, of course. That's where we started, and quads. But there are also some higher order polygons here. And you see that every once in a while. There it is. There is one on this line, another one on this line. And these are too complex, if you will, for Howler's parser to process at this time. So this type of thing we can fix by triangulating it in something that knows how to triangulate, such as Blender, or maybe with Hexagon, the export to OBJ may actually have an option for triangulation. Otherwise, I call it strangulation here because it's going to give us these holes that we see. See in the knee down here, there are some opening gaps because it is a structure of that sort, but there are some polygons that are going to be looking like they're not filling in, right? And that's most likely because they are complex polygons, not simple triangles or quads. So we're going to deal with that later. What we need to deal with first is the coloring. So one thing I would like to recommend is we probably consider ditching this texture, and that worked when I did something else. And I want to do that something else first. And something else is to give it actually some material that will be different from black, because I have a suspicion we are looking at black because it just doesn't know what color to give it. So one thing I'm going to do is say, let's do a material library. Let's call for a material library, and we'll call it, I don't know, materials or colors or something like that. Materials. It's better to call it something materials because there it is, MTL. That will be the MTL file. That's the one that's missing. Usually it's actually given the same name as the file itself, right? So if this one is, what is this? Brace P. So I'm going to actually call it Brace P. Brace P and then .mtl. So that's the companion file to the OBJ file. OBJ has the geometry, MTL has the material. We need to create this file. And then the big question, of course, is how do we then tell it to use it, right? This will just define some of the materials that should be used. It doesn't actually say when to use which material found in that file. So at some point when we start with the geometry buildup here, the facets, we need to actually say which material to use. And we could switch between different materials. And we could have some of the body, maybe the left leg or the right leg, if there's a way to identify them. In this file, I don't think we have any structure anymore. We just have a figure, a group here, but we don't have any more detail saying I'm doing the upper torso or the head or the left shoulder, right shoulder, or anything like that. In the original program, it probably was that way. But then when you go to 3D printing, you may ditch most of that, unless you want individual parts to be colored differently and you have different materials. Then you quite often do that still. Keep the individual group identifiers based on the part numbers or part names. So here we will need to do something like use material, right? So use MTL, and then let's say we call default. Let's say we have a default color, but that will have to be defined in the file. We don't have a system default in our parser yet. That's basically on the middle or bottom of the to-do list right now. We have a couple of other things we see as a real high priority, and it's rare that you don't have the material file exported. It came to me without the material file, so it may be that the original had it, and Chris maybe just didn't remember to send that too, or he wanted to test me. Good job, I like that. Either way, we're not dead in the water. Just because the mech is dark here doesn't mean we cannot see it eventually. So we have a use material, and there will be a material called default, and there is a material library where we say where that material is being defined. And so now we need to actually go to that directory and produce that extra file. So I have some examples that you may have seen, some trees, the dragon, These show quite nicely inside of Windows Preview. What is that? The Windows Explorer, or one of the first trees here. If I open it in 3D Viewer, double click it, you will see the file, and well, some of them may not do too well with regard to the polygons. It really varies depending on what viewer you use. This one, for example, doesn't see our transparency mask. We have a clip mask in here. So the previewer, I think, did better. And then, of course, this one looks pretty good. And you see the color. Let's see if we have the same color if we open it in the 3D viewer. Yep, pretty much. Nice little shiny reflection. There may even be an environment map that it throws in. I don't think I have this in the file. I might, but it's quite possible and likely that some of these viewers also add their own environment for environment reflection mapping, so that you get even better sense of nice lighting conditions, and maybe studio settings and stuff like that. So, well, let's see how this dragon actually looks in here. If I load this one, yep, it is visible. It does have some shading. So it's not a bug in our system to always be black, right? That would be useless. We wouldn't be able to use this, but we do want to have control over the lights a little bit here, the colors. So this one here, we can say, let's give it a nice reddish, maybe a little bit more on the white side. And that's probably the one we see reflecting here on his butt. And then there is some light bluish reflections. Maybe we'll make it even more greenish, cyan. And as we rotate the light, you can see the two are in opposite sides. These, I believe, are point lights, not directional lights. And that's still up for debate as to what's the best. Maybe we should have a choice of, 5 or 6 preset lights, and you can turn them on with a click. This thing is now scalable, by the way. And the aspect ratio is not maintained because we don't frankly care about that too much. We just want to get something going here. And the rest we can live with. So one thing we have here is our little dragon. And I'd like to see the shading coming in a similar way as we have, but when we load the brace P object, like this one here, our mech. And so the problem with this is that we need to get that material file defined, right? Because here's another example, our first tree. Ooh, crash. And we're back. So why did that crash? I think it's because I only copied the OBJ file and the material file. But the material file references some of these leaves, the colors for the leaves and the mask for the opacity. And I didn't copy those over. So my first tree, let me take tree number 5, which is much better looking, I think. Let's open it here first. Yeah. Reminds me of a certain tree in Life is Strange, Before the Storm. Nice game. Let's see, which one is it? Tree 5. So we probably need the material file for sure. This one. Let's say we also need this one, and hopefully that'll be all. We'll find out. Let's copy all of these. Copy that and go to the other folder where we had. Oh, see, I had tree 5 already, but it was missing the other parts. So let's go paste. Yep. And so we have probably these 2 trees already there, but now we have the leaves. And if we open that OBJ file, it will show it. Come on, do something. Do it. Okay. Am I wasting your time here? All right, that's not the same tree. Okay. This is basic tree, this is first tree. Oh, did I pick basic tree 5? I should finish my cup of coffee before I do these recordings. Yeah, first tree 5. Yeah, let's go with that. First tree and material and OBJ. And let's say we need green leaf and transparency. I have no idea if these are the files that we need, but let's go and assume, and we can certainly edit the material file to see what it's actually referencing. So let's copy that and put it in the same folder. Yep, now we have some duplicates that we override. And we are going to do the first tree 5. Open that. And so these are the trees that we do include in the program, and we should be able to load them even if we copy them to a different place, as long as we actually have the files that we need, the reference, the material files, image files for the colors of the leaves and the color texture and the other parts like the stencil mask or transparency mask. So I'm going to go and try it again. And by default, it actually opens on that geometry of the installation. You have Howler, you have installed geometry, and foliage is part of that. There may be a test. I added my own terrains here that I save out of 3D Designer, but you can certainly go to foliage and load the tree from there. Let's see, first tree 3 or first tree 5. There it is. Right. So if you use the right button there and then zoom in a little bit. We have a reset button here, by the way. That's new also. So that helps and sometimes allows you to reset and find your 3D OBJ file a little bit better. But yeah, so this one appears not completely black, a little bit darkish, and if you change the light series, you can see there is some shading happening here, right? And you could certainly make the lights a little bit brighter, and perhaps this one too. So you have 2 lights, and then you can also add a little bit of ambient light. Maybe that one you'll make it a little bit bluish, so it looks like there is some, some skylight. Play with those colors. Okay, so that's how it should appear when you have materials, and you notice there's texture on the tree bark here. So that's coming evidently from an image file. So let's go take a look at what that looks like. So we have a first tree OBJ, first tree 5, and the first tree material. And I've assigned Notepad++ to open it by default. When you double click it, I'm going to open it in Notepad++. You can also right click and say open with Notepad++, right? But who has time for that? So what you see here is new material bark 01. That's the bark. And then we have a leaf. And so, yeah, you see, there's some maps, there's some JPEG images that define the colors. That's usually D for diffuse colors. And then there's a bump map also on this one. And it seems like our graphic pipeline actually will use that. So that's something we would like to test a little bit to see what the difference is if you have the bump and versus when you don't have it. This one here is the leaves. So the leaves, we also add a mask. So there is a diffuse coloring here. And let me zoom in a little bit here. There's diffuse coloring and there is reflection. No, maybe not reflection. Who knows what that is? But there is a clip mask, and we use the same tethered. You can see that's the same file name. And so I don't know what that one actually does. I'll have to investigate that a little bit. But this one here clearly gives you the basic color. So that's your texture coloring. And then this one here is the transparency mask, like a clip mask. Might be that this one is not actually useful, or maybe it still does something to the reflection. It might actually, this might be indicating how much reflection there is. But there is a couple, or maybe it's the transparency, TR, or silly me, of course. Yeah, K is a factor, and then D for diffusion, diffuse color diffuse, or something like that. But TR, I think, is transparency. And the thing is, I experimented without it, but still with the clip, and I was still getting the expected result. I didn't compare side by side, so we'll get to that in a separate tutorial. One thing I wanted to focus on though is the diffuse color. There, it's white, and then I don't know, environment reflection, I guess, environment lighting or something, ambient, specular. There's a couple of parameters, the specular factor. And then transparency. So there's a couple of parameters you really should have as a basic color information. And that's what's missing in our Mac. Right. So one thing I'm going to do is simply take that as an example. Let's say if we want let's take the whole thing and we'll comment out a few that we don't currently use for the Mac, but it will be ready to do something similar. So here's the Mac. And what I'll do is I'll create a new text file. Come on, where's my text file? Text document. And I'll call it, same thing, brace P, BRACEP dot MTL. Remember, that's the material file going with the, oh, and of course it thinks it needs to add thank you Windows, but no thank you. We don't need an extension .txt. Yes, we're fine with that. So we still open this as a Notepad++ because I have, when I do this, open Notepad++, I will go to another app and select the same Notepad++, but then check the option to say, oh, always open it with that. Right. So once you're there, you have an empty file, and you just paste those lines that we had copied from the prior example. So here we're going to call it not bark, but default. That will be our default material. New material is being defined here. Diffuse color will be, that's one RGB, red, green, blue. And so that's the maximum value. It's normalized to go from 0 to 1. And so this one is white. This one is black. That's the environment. We'll experiment with this a little bit to see what happens if we actually change it to like a bluish tint, RGB, if we give it like a 0.5 or something like that. And we might get some interesting results with that. I encourage you to play with that because it really brings home the whole capabilities you have in an OBJ file. Ambient, that's going to be very bright, so I don't think we need that much. Let's give it a 0.3, and let's see, what is it, a mech, maybe a little bit of a reddish tint, right? Red, green, and a tiny little bit on the blue. So 0.3, 0.2, 0.1. Specular highlight, maybe a little bit more metallic looking, so we'll give it a little bit brighter on the specularity here. And this one we'll have to experiment if we make it bigger or smaller to spread the metallic, the specular highlight across the metals even more, or if you want it tight, like make it polished or make it like washed metal, dirty metal. So transparency, we'll experiment with that. And then the others, I don't know really what we want to do with these. So let's just comment them out for now, and then we'll see. Certainly the maps we don't use right now, but in the future we might have a use for a texture map or a decal or something that will go on the Mac, and so we can use this as a placeholder for stuff to experiment with. This should essentially work now as a base color definition or material definition. And so let's go save this. I just did, and now we have. I can open it again. I can also see here, does it already impact the preview, or if I double click it to open it in the 3D viewer that Windows comes with, does it already make a difference? It seems like yes, there is a little bit of a different appearance. It's a little bit more shaded, less diffuse. I don't know, there's something a little bit different. So that's promising. It looks like it's listening to or looking at some of the values. Nice metallic reflection there, look at that. So if we, a specular highlight actually, not a reflection, but anyway, so we can probably try this now. Let's go back to our parser here, our 3D OBJ renderer, and where was it? Here, expand it to OBJ2, good demo, and hexagon. It's one of the hexagon examples by Chris Locke. Here is the brace P. Let's brace yourselves. Bingo, we now have color. All right. So that's cool because we really didn't have to do that much more. Even the texture addresses on the vertices are still there. And if we go to maybe the shaded or the wireframe mode for a little bit more interactive. By the way, this is going to go much faster really soon. We now have finished 2023 and we're starting development. We're in alpha, not even beta yet, but we're in alpha for 2024. And one thing that you'll see is that this is going to go much faster for the rendering because Dan has been developing a graphic pipeline of his own that runs with the GPU, and if not even on the GPU. So it's gonna be kick-ass. It's gonna be really cool. And pardon my français here. kicker le cul de sac. There you go. Because it is kind of slow-ish, but it's usable, right? You can definitely make a nice encounter of different buddies here. Uh, what do we call them? Mech, Chief Master Mech, or something like that. So now here we might want to reduce the color a little bit or make it more of a reddish. And there you go. And then this one might be a little bit more of a purple, bluish, darker-ish. And then ambient might be dark gray. So now we're getting the real aha moment. Look at that, look at that. Oh my God, this is so awesome. So how do we use this? You can use this as a brush, make a custom brush, and maybe you have another angle you want, like this, and maybe different lighting. Add to the brush, so now you have an ambient light. You have an animated brush now with count of 2 frames, and let's keep going. Maybe a little bit smaller. There's a little junior. Right, make that one there. Add to the brush, and when we're done, okay, this rendering is there, but we can undo to get out of it. But we have the brush. We have the brush which we can store and manage a copy of this. And come on, keep going. Oh, my disk is so slow. Okay. Wait. Oh, it already had it stored. Silly me. I didn't have to do that anymore. Yeah, it's automatically, when you do an animated brush like this from the 3D OBJ parser, it automatically stores it for you. So you can show the film strip, and here are my 3 snapshots of the same mech. And as you're painting, it's cycling through them, right? So you have a whole army of them. If you, for example, if you want to have them all stand by here on this side, you do a quick selection mask, maybe something like this. Then you say, no, don't write over this. Use the shift key with the right button to remove that from the selection. And so now you have the mechs all over here, painted and appearing the way you want there. Now maybe you need them a little bit bigger, and actually see the preview of that. A little bit bigger like this, and you want the distance, the step distance between the impacts of these brushes a little bit bigger too, so that you have fewer of them, but they are all nicely seen. Oops, I don't want to erase the other part, so let's do erase selected. Erase selected to primary color, no, secondary color, there you go. So now as you're painting, it's going to cycle through these 3 images you have in the custom brush. And of course you can also stamp them down. Here's the stamp mode, the 3 dots. That's the idea with this, is that you stamp one after another, and every time you stamp, it moves. After the stamp is there, it moves to the next one. Now unfortunately it doesn't show the preview of that next one. It shows the preview of the first one. I call that a bug. It's not a showstopper, but we certainly could do better. We should probably look at improving it so the current frame that is about to be clicked down here is the one that's going to be seen. Right? You can get every third, 1 out of 3 is the one you actually preview, is the one that's going to go down. Anyway, so that's where we're going with regard to fixing some of these OBJ files. Now that's parts of that is part of the fix. There are other things we want to do, and one of them is to fix those holes. There's a couple of holes here or there. Let me show you here. If I put this guy here, in fact, since we have the option here to change the hue, I'm going to go with more of a metallic dark blue, maybe something like this. Where's my bluish? There you go. And then also hue, that's hue saturation, a little bit more saturated, and value a little bit darker, but then also more on the, oops, there you go, a little bit dark metallic looking, and then also a little bit more on the blue in the reflection and cyan. There you go, something like that should look pretty neat. Look at that. All right, but so there still is a problem. First of all, I'm going to store that brush, store that, so I don't have to depend on the other one. This one is fine, but I don't want to mess with that. In fact, I want just 1 image now, so I'm going to look at the film strip. There are still all 3 there. I'm going to delete one. Delete the frame. That will delete the most recent one, the last one in the series here. Right, so I'm going to delete this frame. Yep, now we have 2. Delete one more. Yep, now we have just one. And all I want to do is work with this right now. So hide the film strip, and you can see you can click it in a couple of places, and it's the same boy, big boy, bad boy. But we we have a little problem with this guy, and that's the fact that there is some holes. You can see. Let me hide the preview of the map. You see right here there's a polygon missing here. It should be closed off here. This tube is going into a side. That facet is missing. And that's a complex polygon. It's not just a quad or a triangle, and that's why it's missing. Same with some of the others. Probably the top of this cylinder here is a circle made of maybe 20 vertices or something like that. Probably one over here. And so these are going to be problematic for a while. And what we need to do is fix those by triangulating the object. So I'm going to do that in another tutorial. In Blender, you can do that easily. Hexagon, maybe. I don't know Hexagon that well, but I would imagine you can probably force it to triangulate and then export it. There's a lot of other tools that can be used to triangulate your surfaces when they are not triangles or quads, or even quads if you need them to be in stereolithography. In fact, that's one way to do it. If you print it out, if you save it out to STL, it will automatically force it to triangles. We should try that as an experiment. And then you can load the STL back in and convert it back to, save it back out to OBJ. Your OBJ should now be a bunch of triangles. So let's do that in another tutorial. And now let's just finish this up with something really cool. I'm going to go, this one here, I'm going to delete the last frame too, and the one before. So we have red and blue. This guy here, we will reset the default. Where's my reset option? There. So we should have the reddish, yep, and there it is, and we have the blue. All right, so if you play Halo, you know what red and blue means. Here we go, and it's probably not just Halo, I don't know. So we have one here, get this guy. Now you want to turn him the other way, so they're facing each other. So you can use the X, I think, yep. X is for horizontal axis and Y is for vertical axis. Right? So you could use X, keyboard shortcut X, and click that, and there you go. Now, if you want something really cool that they're standing on, maybe a grid, let's do that. Let's go snapshot this quick and clear and go. Let's go minimize these brushes. Let's move them aside. This guy goes here. This guy goes here. So I want a grid or a plaid pattern or something like what could be really fun. Oh, I know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to use one of those rendered patterns that look like the dread plating. Right, a little bit bigger and without the weathering. And then we'll also make it less intense in terms of the, oh no, actually we can just keep it that way. But then what we'll do is we'll make sure it's seamless, which it probably is already anyway. Let's go just for the sake here, image, make seamless. And then, since that's a significant step, we'll store that. So we have a snapshot copy here. This we don't need, we can minimize that. But let's go and hide the preview of the brush. And now I'm going to use that in the 3D view. Now you can either go to transform as a 3D perspective, and then that will give you, oh, I don't want it this way. Let's keep this back to 0 and then this way. Yeah, so the bots are standing on this, right? Do you see what I'm doing here? I'm going to go and place one here. And then I'm going to go back and place this guy X this way, right? Oop. There you go. No, undo. U for undo. Come on. There you go. Maybe I want this one bigger, so I'll see if I can even change the size of my currently loaded brush here. Resample the brush, about this big, and there you go. So lots of fun we can have with this. Hello, why is this not rendering? Something's really slow on my system these days. So we have two bots, and the ground floor is kind of better, but it's not really super cool. So one thing I'll do instead, I'll go back to that, hide the robot. Let's see. preview eye off. I'm going to use the 3D renderer with that. There's two of them to choose from. 3D Designer has an interesting rendering option, especially if you want to quickly just animate, rotate it, and stuff like that. So you could do something with that, like a little pattern like this. And the coloring of the object could come from the texture itself. So you have some changes in elevation, but also in color from the swap image. Oh, I didn't load anything in the swap image. Silly me. I need to actually do that. So let's go boom and put that same image into the swap and then swap back to the main image. Now I can go to transform 3D designer, and there you go. So now we have the texture there, and maybe we'll want to make it a little bit bigger. Let's see, there's a scale this way, there's a scale this way. We can also move in and out or up and down. We can change the angle a little bit here, change the wide angle view, something like this. There's also some ambient occlusion. Let's do multiply mode. And of course, if we expand this vertically, we have some nice little shadow cast. All right, so that gives you something else to use as the platform on which these guys are going to stand, right? So you can render that. And there's a few other options: erosion and snow, and elevation-based shading and colors, snow and sand and rocks and stuff like that. But the ultimate one is probably using the tiling of this. This plaid pattern can be tiled infinitely until it disappears in the fog. So what I'll do is I'll go to the next rendering option here, Puppy Ray. And Puppy Ray is GPU based, and it could certainly lead to perhaps what we will see in the future also in the OBJ loader. Right, so right now it's meant to be used for generating landscapes or displaying, rendering landscapes based on that elevation map. You can disable the interpolation, so it's really blocky in its appearance. You can go to scale it, so it's a little bit, and there's a water plane too. You can hide that water plane, or you can move the terrain up. Right, let's say we want this. We want to look at the sun, so let's turn the angle here. Let's scale it down even more, so it's almost, oh, there, you can actually keep the water visible too. So the bots are going to have to step into the water if they don't watch where they go. There's also a texture map. We can add some extra tech surface there, or bump map. Maybe, let's see, a riverbed. That looks a little bit more natural. But let's say if we want to actually have it like this. Right? So there, now we also will add a little bit more of the water visibility. Let's make it 33 or 22. There you go. You see some of that bluish tint on the water. And then we need to just pick a place where both bots can stand. One is going to stand here and the other one is going to stand here. Something like that. Let's say we want that a little bit more flat and then up out of the water. Or if you don't want the water at all, you can also turn it off. Right here, there's different waves, Perlin noise for the waves. Let's go to a higher quality there without anti-aliasing at first. We're still working on it. Let's say we want some caustics also. Let's see if that's too much of it. Yeah, no, it adds a little bit of caustic refracted lights there. So now I mentioned the fog can go infinite there. Well, not exactly. 10 times it will go to the back. Right, so you can have it disappear in the fog. You can also move the sun back there. Move the sun away some other place. So you see a nice little reflection here of the water. Move it up. Make the sun bigger perhaps, so that will brighten the reflected area here of the sun. So let's make it a 234. Maybe the sun, let's see, wide angle. Maybe we'll also do something like a reddish tint for the sky. I think we have one with a big sun over there as well. Cool. Or maybe just one sun. Two is, ooh, a little bit too much to take in here. So I'm going to go sky with this one here. And then we also need the fog to look a little bit different. This is not so good right now, this bluish tint. So maybe a reddish tint for the fog. and maybe a little bit darker. It's far away. There you go. All right, so now let's go render that. Let's not be picky. Let's just do final render. There's lots of other things you can do on that for the perfect shot, but then once you're done with that, you see the interface coming back. Still rendering now, 60 passes. Okay, there you go. So now we have this empty background image, and we still have these two guys, and we have a couple of ways to combine those. I mean, if you want to really use this image, you take this one, you put the other one in a layer, you flag the white as transparent. It's not going to do that automatically though. So we don't have alpha channel on this image. You could add that first and then stamp it down as a single brush. Pick the whole thing up as a brush with the alpha channel, transparent background, opaque bots or max, and then stamp it down or fill it in. There's a couple of ways to work with this, right? And the way we probably would want to say, well, let's just go with this background and take that bot again. Take the mech number 1 and show the preview. And so now you can see this. And the lighting, of course, is a little bit off. We didn't plan properly for a nice little reflection or reflective specular highlight on that. That takes a little bit of extra work. And I think I've taken too much of your time already. So red, green, blue, that's down here. But here we have a hue saturation value. I'm going to make it a little bit darker. There you go. That's probably a much better thing. And maybe a little bit more red on that, just to show that we are reflecting a reddish environment. Hue saturation value, maybe the hue. What is it we could possibly do here that will completely destroy it? That's too much. Let's go without that much red. There you go. Okay, so we'll pull one of them down here. And then the other guy, again, we will turn it around, and that's the X. And then we will also change a little bit on the lighting for that one. So what's that? Maybe like this. Wait, this is the one we wanted. There you go. So we want the red, green, blue, hue saturation value. Let's go with a different. It would be nice if we could do this dynamically, but I guess it's too time consuming if it's an animator brush. It wouldn't be very dynamic if we had like 20 or 200 frames in that anim brush. Okay, let's take a greenish look here and make it a little bit bigger, and also hue saturation a little bit less saturated. See, that's a black and white almost. And what do we have else? Then we could do red, green, blue. Still too bright here. Let's give it darker. Yeah, something like this. Okay, and then I'll use X to, well, if I do a single click, it's there, but that's not what I want. So I'm gonna X the other way. There you go. Right, and maybe I don't need it exactly fully visible. Maybe I'll put them down here. Right, and then one thing that's also quite useful is to do a little bit of, first of all, a snapshot of this, and then take a photographic filter. One of them is pretty nice here. It's called the soft contrast improvement. Now it's a little bit too much, but you can adjust this to do just a tiny little bit of soft contrast, so the dark pixels kind of bleed a little bit into the bright pixels and vice versa, and you have a little bit of a transition that looks a little bit better. You can also add some extra sharpening or crisp. Let's see, what is it? Sharpen, there it is. Digital photo enhance, my favorite. Hue saturation value, one click, and there it is. Alright, so hopefully that will give you some ideas. You know, once you have your mech and your game is ready to be shown, you want to create some cool artwork and battle scenes and that sort of things. And of course, we're never done until we have at least a little bit of lens flares here. So let's do also a little bit of lens flares, and you could even do a little bit of a lens flare or a reflection. Let's see, a reddish one on some of the parts. Let's pretend this guy here is exposed to the sun in a perfect angle, and you get a little bit of a a reflection there. Or actually, these might be shooting right now, right? Yeah, let's put a little boom, boom right there. And oh yeah, so yeah, have fun.